You are so useless. All you do is spend my son's money. You can't even bear an heir.
The blow landed before the gasp did. Madame Yonsuk stood over her daughter-in-law, chest heaving, rings glittering, every inch the terrifying matriarch of the most feared criminal dynasty on the Korean peninsula. She opened her mouth to declare Bianca Lorenzo utterly finished. But the declaration never came, because from somewhere deep in the east corridor of the Sin estate, the sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps began moving toward the hall. And every person in that room, every crime boss, every socialite, every terrified servant recognized that particular sound. They had heard it once before. Right before the last man who had disrespected the Shin family had simply ceased to exist. Bianca Lorenzo had not wanted to come to Busan. She had said so, quietly and clearly, standing in the floor-to-ceiling windowed living room of her penthouse apartment in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago, watching the October skyline bleed orange over Lake Michigan. She had said it with the particular calm of a woman who had learned in the 11 months since she had signed the contract that turned her into Mrs. Shin Jae-won, that there were very few battles worth picking with a man like her husband. Jae-won had listened with his hands in the pockets of his impeccably tailored brioni trousers, his face carrying that particular expression she had catalogued meticulously, the one that looked like patience, but was actually a very expensive performance of it. He was tall, lean, and devastatingly handsome in the way that certain Korean men seem to be. Effortlessly, almost unfairly so, with sharp jaw, dark eyes that gave absolutely nothing away, and the kind of bone structure that fashion photographers wept over. He was also, Bianca had lived beside him, the single most disciplined human being she had ever encountered. He never lost his temper. He never raised his voice. He never gave her a reason to doubt the arrangement they had entered into with the clinical precision of a corporate merger, because that was exactly what it was. Not a marriage, a contract. The terms had been laid out by Jae-won himself over dinner at a linea in Chicago, 6 weeks after his associate had approached Bianca's architectural firm in the River North neighborhood with what was described, absurdly, as a business proposition of a personal nature. Jae-won had slid a document across the white tablecloth with the same energy another man might use to pass the salt. He needed a wife. Specifically, he needed a wife who was visible, credible, and completely outside the world of Korean high society, meaning someone his mother could not control, intimidate, or marry off to a rival family. He needed the marriage to appear real enough to satisfy his grandfather, Elder Yonsuk Shin, the 83-year-old patriarch, who had built the Shin conglomerate from nothing, and who had made it explicitly clear, twice in writing and once over a dinner that reported reduced 3 grown men to tears, that he would liquidate every share of Jae-won's inheritance the moment he believed his grandson was unfit to carry the family legacy. Jae-won had not told Bianca why the marriage needed to appear real. Not right. He told her the compensation, $15 million at signing, a further $20 million at the 2-year mark. Full use of his Chicago penthouse, his driver, his accounts, and his name. In exchange, she would attend 6 family events per year, present convincingly as a devoted wife, and ask absolutely no questions about the parts of his life he chose not to share. Bianca, who had grown up in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, who had put herself through architecture school on scholarships and sheer refusal to fail, who had built a moderately successful firm from a rented desk and a laptop, had looked at the number on that document and made a decision that she had spent the 11 months since oscillating between justifying and regretting. She had signed. And for 11 months, she had been spectacularly good at the performance. She had attended the charity galas in Busan and the board dinners in Greenwich, Connecticut, where the Shin family maintained their American headquarters in a fortress of a mansion that made the Kensington estates she had read about in novels look like summer cottages. She had worn the clothes Jae-won's stylist selected, had mastered the precise angle of deference that satisfied the older Korean guests without making the Western ones uncomfortable. She had smiled endlessly, beautifully, and completely without warmth at Madame Yonsuk Shin. Madame Yonsuk was the kind of woman who made Bianca's skin crawl in a way she had never experienced before. And Bianca had survived 3 years working construction sites in Chicago, where men routinely tried to make her feel invisible. Yonsuk was 61 years old, preserved by the combined efforts of the finest cosmetic surgeons in Gangnam, and a complete absence of any emotion that might create lines on her face. She wore exclusively Korean designers and a permanent expression of polished disgust. From the first moment she had laid eyes on Bianca at the Greenwich estate, Yonsuk had treated her with a particular brand of contempt, reserved for things that have wandered onto property where they do not belong. She had called Bianca decorative once, to Jae-won's face in front of 8 dinner guests. She had said it the way one might say a vase was decorative, acknowledging its presence while dismissing its purpose. Jae-won had not flinched. He had simply lifted his wine glass, taken a slow sip, and changed the subject. Bianca had pressed her heel into the sole of her Manolo Blahnik until the pain cleared the heat from her face. That had been month 3. By month 6, Yonsuk had graduated from loaded comments to open campaign. She had begun referring to Bianca as the American in front of staff, the way one might refer to an inconvenient weather pattern. She had twice, very publicly, questioned Bianca's ability to provide Jae-won with children, phrasing it each time with the surgical precision of a woman who knew exactly how to wound without leaving a mark that could be pointed to in court. At the Greenwich New Year's party, she had seated Bianca at the far end of the table, separated from Jae-won by 11 guests and an ice sculpture, while positioning the daughter of a Busan shipping magnate, a pale, quiet girl named Soo-min, directly at Jae-won's right hand. Jae-won had noticed. He had also done nothing. This was the architecture of Bianca's life, brutally designed, structurally sound on paper, and completely hollow at the center. She had called her best friend Danielle, who lived in a brownstone in Harlem and had absolutely no patience for billionaire nonsense. On the flight to Busan for the end-of-year family gala, Bianca, Danielle had said, her voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who has delivered the same warning 6 times, you are not being paid enough to let that woman hit you. Nobody is paying you enough for that. You have 11 months left. 11 months, and you walk away with $35 million. And you never have to see that woman again. Bianca had looked out the window of the private jet at the dark Pacific spread beneath her and said nothing. The Shin family estate in Busan sat in this exclusive Hyundai district, a compound of black stone and glass overlooking the Korea Strait, designed with the kind of ruthless elegance that declared wealth not by excess, but by restraint. It was extraordinary and cold, exactly like its mistress. Bianca had arrived the evening before the gala, been shown to the East guests' suite by a silent staff member who kept her eyes at floor level and had spent the night lying awake, listening to the building settle around her. In the morning, she had dressed carefully in a silk Valentino midi dress in deep burgundy, applied her makeup with the precision of a woman going into combat, and descended to the main receiving hall, where the pre-gala luncheon was already underway. 45 minutes later, Madame Yonsuk Shin had reached across a decade of calculated cruelty and escalated to something that could not be walked back. And Bianca Lorenzo, 31 years old, Black American, architectural consultant, and the most elaborate miscast leading lady in the history of Korean organized crime, was lying on the marble floor of the Shin estate with a ringing in her left ear and a fury in her chest that $15 million was no longer sufficient to contain. If you felt that opening hit like a freight train, wait until you see what Bianca does with the truth she has been carrying for 11 months. Kindly hit subscribe and keep watching. Nobody moved. That was the thing Bianca noticed first, even before the ringing in her ear sharpened into clarity, even before she registered the cold of the marble through the silk of her dress. 30 of the most powerful people in South Korea sat perfectly, absolutely still, and not one of them moved to help her. The Georgian player had stopped. The serving staff had flattened themselves against the walls like they were trying to become part of the architecture. Bianca pushed herself upright, slowly, one palm against the marble, and the sound of the shattered celadon vase crunching under her hand was the only noise in the entire hall. She stood up. She did not touch her face, though the left side of it burned with an insistent, pulsing heat that she knew was going to darken into something ugly before the evening was done. She did not look at the broken vase. She did not look at the frozen guests. She looked directly at Madame Yonsuk Shin, who stood 4 feet away with the serving tray still gripped in both hands, chest heaving, pearls trembling at her throat, eyes bright with the particular vicious satisfaction of a woman who had just done something she had wanted to do for a very long time. "You should have stayed in Chicago," Yonsuk said. Her English precise and deliberately chosen, because she wanted every Western guest in the room to understand her perfectly. "You were never meant for this family. You are a decoration that has overstayed its purpose. A cheap, common girl from a cheap, common city. And my son was a fool to bring you here." Bianca said nothing. The silence was not weakness. Danielle had taught her that. Years ago, back in Bronzeville, when silence was the only currency you had, that nobody could take from you. Bianca stood straight, her burgundy dress intact, her face composed into a stillness so absolute that several guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs because it was the stillness of someone who knows something. "Do you hear me?" Yonsuk's voice climbed, color rising in her neck. The composure of the performance was fraying at the edges. She had expected tears. She had expected the American girl to break, to beg, to prove in front of witnesses that she was exactly what Yonsuk had always claimed: unworthy, stable, a mistake her son could be publicly released from. Instead, Bianca was looking at her the way a chess player looks at a queen that has just sacrificed itself needlessly with quiet, clinical recognition. "I hear you, Madame Shin," Bianca said. Her voice was soft. The acoustics of the hall carried it perfectly. "I have always heard you." Then the footsteps reached the hall. Shin Jae-won walked through the eastern archway with 3 of his men behind him. Still dressed in his travel clothes, his black cashmere coat dusted with the cold of the Busan air. He had arrived from Incheon 2 hours early, a fact nobody had told Bianca, and a fact she would later understand that nobody had told Yonsuk either. He took in the scene in less than 2 seconds. The broken vase, the serving tray in his mother's hands. Bianca standing alone in the center of the floor. The visible heat along the left side of her face. Something moved behind his eyes. It was not the something that a husband feels when his wife has been hurt. Bianca knew better than to expect that. It was something older and colder and far more dangerous. The particular calculation of a man whose entire empire rests on the principle that what belongs to him is not touched. "Mother," Jae-won said. One word. Yonsuk's chin lifted. "She was disrespectful," Yonsuk began, sliding immediately into Korean, which she always did when she wanted to exclude Bianca from a conversation happening in Bianca's presence. "She spoke to my baker." "In English," Jae-won said. "Everything in this room will be said in English tonight." A charged silence. Yonsuk's jaw tightened. "She embarrassed this family," Yonsuk said, switching with visible effort. "In front of Chairwoman Baek and the others, she questioned my decision regarding the seating arrangement for this evening. I asked a question," Bianca said, her voice still perfectly level. "I asked why my seat for this evening's gala had been replaced with Miss Suminhan's name card. That was the entirety of my crime." A few of the guests who understood the Han family's significance exchanged glances. Sumin Han was the daughter of Chairman Byung-go Han of Han Shipping. The family Yonsuk had been attempting to broker a marriage alliance with for 2 years before Jae-won had arrived from Chicago with an American wife and derailed every plan. Jae-won crossed the hall. He stopped in front of Bianca. He looked at the side of her face for a long moment, and the muscle in his jaw moved once. "Are you injured?" he asked. "I'm fine," Bianca said. It was the contractually correct answer. She had been giving contractually correct answers for 11 months. Jae-won turned to face his mother. The men who had walked in with him had fanned out along the perimeter of the room, with the kind of practiced quiet that reminded everyone present exactly what kind of family they were dealing with. "You will go to your suite," Jae-won said to Yonsuk. "Jae-won, I am your mother, and I will not be dismissed like." And the room temperature dropped 5 degrees. "She is not your wife," Yonsuk spat, abandoning all pretense. She stepped forward, lowering her voice to a hiss that nonetheless carried in the stunned silence. "She is a prop, a mask, and a very expensive one that has gone on long enough. Your grandfather is asking questions, Jae-won. Your father is asking questions. The Han family alliance would solve every problem this family has. And you are letting this girl stand in the way of it because you are afraid." "Enough," Jae-won said. "You are afraid of what they will do when they finally understand what you are." The words landed like a stone into still water. Bianca felt every guest in the room hold their breath simultaneously. She looked at the side of Jae-won's face. Is the absolute stillness that had replaced like every other expression. She thought about the $35 million, waiting on the other side of a year she suddenly was not certain she would survive intact. She thought about Danielle, who had said, with characteristic bluntness, that there was no amount of money worth the systematic dismantling of your own dignity. Go to your sweet mother, Jae-won repeated, and his voice had descended to the register that, based on 11 months of observation, meant the conversation was over permanently. Yonsuk straightened. She set the serving tray down on the nearest table with a slow, deliberate click. She looked at Bianca with an expression of absolute contempt, the look of a woman who had just been temporarily interrupted, not defeated, and she walked out of the hall. The guests slowly, awkwardly resumed breathing. Jae-won placed his hand lightly on Bianca's elbow and guided her toward the corridor. His grip was professional, like an escort at a formal event. His staff closed around them, and the sounds of the hall fell away behind the heavy doors. In the corridor, Jae-won released her elbow and turned to face her. His expression was the same controlled surface it always was, but beneath it, Bianca could see the machinery running hard. "I apologize for her behavior," he said. "In front of 30 people, I know." Bianca looked at him for a long moment. What did she mean? When she said you were afraid of what you are? Something crossed his face. It was the first unguarded thing she had ever seen there, so that she nearly missed it. He didn't answer. Jae-won. "Get some rest before the gala," he said, already turning. "I will have Dr. Yoon look at your face." "I don't need a doctor," Bianca said to his back. "I need an honest conversation." He paused, one hand on the corridor wall. His shoulders were taut under the cashmere coat. "Some conversations," he said quietly, "cost more than you want to pay." And he walked away, leaving Bianca standing alone in the cold corridor of the Shin estate, the side of her face throbbing, 11 months of silence, pressing against the inside of her chest, like a door that someone was pushing very hard from the other side. She reached into the pocket of her dress. Her phone was there. She had 3 missed calls from Danielle and a text that read simply, "Call me before you do something that cannot be undone." Bianca looked at the phone. She looked down the empty corridor where Jae-won had disappeared. Then she looked in the opposite direction, toward the east wing where she knew, because she had learned the architecture of this house the same way she learned every building, by walking its bones alone at night, that Jae-won kept his private study. The room he disappeared into for hours. The room no staff member entered. The room from which she had heard, once and only once, on a sleepless night in month 4, the sound of a man laughing with a kind of unguarded joy she had never once heard from him in her presence. She had never asked about it. She had been paid not to ask. But Madame Yonsuk Shin had just struck her across the face in front of 30 witnesses, and Bianca Lorenzo had grown up in Bronzeville, where you learned young that some tests don't stay in the ledger forever. She put the phone back in her pocket. You already know what she's going to find, but knowing and seeing are 2 very different things. If this story has you gripped, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. The study door was unlocked. That was the first thing that surprised her. In 11 months of observing Jae-won's habits with the quiet precision of a woman who had nothing else to do in the margins of her borrowed life, Bianca had never once seen that door unlocked. She had assumed it required a code, a key, some layer of the fortress architecture that defined everything about this family. But the handle turned smoothly under her palm, and the door swung inward, and the second thing that surprised her stopped her completely on the threshold. Jae-won was not alone. The man sitting across from him on the low leather sofa was Korean, roughly Jae-won's age, with an open, warm face that was currently mid-sentence. One hand gesturing expressively, the other resting on the cushion between them in a way that closed the distance, without quite crossing it. He was not a business associate. Bianca knew what Jae-won's business associates looked like, how they sat, how they held their bodies in his presence, with the particular contracted posture of men operating near something dangerous. This man sat the way people only sit when they feel completely, unconditionally safe. Jae-won saw her first. The change in his face was instantaneous and total. Every warm thing that had been there a half second ago collapsed behind the wall, and what remained was the face she knew. Controlled, still, and giving nothing away. The other man turned, following Jae-won's gaze, and when he saw Bianca, he stood quickly, instinctively, the way people stand when they have been caught in a truth they weren't ready to share. The three of them existed in the worst possible silence for 4 full seconds. Bianca, one said. I'm sorry, she said automatically. The door was open. This is Hyun, Jae-won said. And the flatness with which he said it, the complete absence of context or qualifier, told her everything context and qualifier would have told her anyway. She would later think about for a long time. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the exhausted, careful look of a man who had been braced for this particular moment for years and had not yet decided how he felt about it finally arriving. Mrs. Shin, Hyun said quietly. His English was accented but precise. Bianca, she corrected, because she was very tired of being Mrs. Shin. She stepped back from the doorway. She pulled the door closed behind her. She stood in the corridor with her back against the wall and the side of her face still throbbing, and the absolute clarity of the picture rearranging itself inside her mind. Every strange absence sliding into place, every locked door and managed distance and contractual clause suddenly illuminated from behind like an X-ray. She stood there for a long time. Then she went to her suite, sat on the edge of the bed, and called Danielle. Danielle picked up on the first ring. Tell me you're on a plane home. She hit me with a serving tray, Bianca said, a silence so complete it had texture. Then, with the controlled fury of a woman who had grown up 2 blocks from Bianca in Bronzeville and had never once in her life backed down from anything, Danielle said, I need you to tell me exactly where in Korea you are, because I will fly commercial if I have to. Danielle. Bianca. I found something. Another silence. Different in quality. Bianca looked at the wall. Through it, somewhere in the east wing, Jae-won was having a conversation she was not part of about a secret she had just walked into that had been the load-bearing wall of the entire structure she had been living inside for 11 months. The kind of something, Bianca said slowly, that explains everything, she told Danielle. She told her quietly and completely. And Danielle listened without interrupting, which was how Bianca knew Danielle understood the gravity. Because Danielle had not been silent for longer than 45 consecutive seconds since 1:9:99. When Bianca finished, Danielle exhaled. Okay, she said. Okay. So here is what you are going to do. You are going to sit exactly where you are. You are not going to go to that gala. You are going to call your lawyer. You are going to review every clause in that contract, and you are going to. The contract has a non-disclosure, Bianca said. I know it has a non-disclosure. It has a very specific non-disclosure. Bianca. Danielle's voice dropped into the register she used when she was genuinely frightened. These are not regular rich people. You know what his family does. You have known that from the beginning. I know. So you are going to sit down and you are going to be smart. His mother hit me with a serving tray, Danielle, in front of 30 people. And he walked her to her suite and told me to rest. The silence this time was Danielle running the numbers, the same calculation Bianca had already run. $35 million is against an injury that wouldn't show up on any contract. 11 months of swallowing every indignity Yonsuk had manufactured against one afternoon that had finally crossed from psychological to physical. What do you want to do? Danielle asked finally. Bianca looked at the window. Outside, the Korea Strait was grey and enormous and indifferent. The lights of Hyundai were beginning to come on as the afternoon darkened. Somewhere below, the estate staff was preparing for the gala, laying tables, arranging flowers, polishing surfaces that would reflect back the faces of the people who attended these events so they could admire themselves. I want to go to the gala, Bianca said. That is the opposite of what I just told you to do. I know. I have been quiet for 11 months, Danielle. I signed a contract that said I would be quiet. I have been quiet through every dinner and every slight and every time that woman looked at me like I was something that needed to be cleaned off the bottom of her shoe. Bianca's voice was perfectly steady. It was the steadiness of someone who has made a decision from so deep in their center that there is no turbulence on surface. She put her hands on me today, and her son looked me in the eye and told me to rest. A long pause. How bad is the bruise? Danielle asked. It's coming up. Good, Danielle said grimly. Wear something that makes it visible. And Bianca, if you are going to do this, do it completely. No half measures. You understand me? Bianca understood her. She spent 2 hours getting ready. She was deliberate about every choice. She selected the gown she had brought as a backup, a floor-length column, dress in ivory with a structured neckline, a choice that now, against the darkening bruise along her left cheekbone, created the precise visual contrast she needed. She applied her makeup everywhere, except the bruise, which she left uncovered, and which the lighting in the Shin Estate's grand ballroom would pick up from across the room. She wore no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she had never once forgotten to wear, because the contract was specific about that, and which tonight felt less like an accessory and more like a piece of evidence. She was ready 20 minutes before the gala began. There was a knock at her door. When she opened it, Jae-won stood in the corridor in a black tuxedo that had been fitted to him with the precision of a second skin. He looked at the bruise. Something moved through his expression and was immediately suppressed. You don't have to attend tonight, he said. The contract says I attend all 6 annual family events, Bianca replied pleasantly. This is event number 6. A pause. Bianca. You should have led with an honest conversation, Jae-won, she said, stepping past him into the corridor. 11 months ago, before I signed anything, you should have told me what I was actually protecting. She felt him go still behind her. Instead, she continued, walking toward the staircase, her heels clicking against the marble with the calm rhythm of a metronome. You paid me to be a wall between your secret and your grandfather, and I have been an excellent wall. For 11 months, I have been the best wall money has ever built. She paused at the top of the staircase, turned to look at him over her shoulder. But walls, Jae-won, have load limits, and your mother just found mine. She descended the staircase into the light of the gala below, and the evening began. She is walking into that ballroom with a bruise on her face and the truth in her pocket, and not one person in that room knows what is about to happen. Stay with us and subscribe if you haven't already. The grand ballroom of the Shin estate was the most beautiful room Bianca had ever hated. It was designed for intimidation, dressed as elegance. 3 stories of black lacquered walls inlaid with gold leaf panels. A ceiling of hand-blown glass chandeliers that cast everything below in amber. Warmth, long tables draped in ivory silk, set with enough porcelain and crystal to fund a small school district. The guests moved through it like expensive fish in an expensive tank. The women in couture, the men in tuxedos that cost more than cars. Every conversation a transaction disguised as pleasantry. Bianca descended the curves staircase into the ballroom and felt the shift the moment. People saw her face, not the dress, the bruise. It was coming up beautifully now, a deep plum and rose along her left cheekbone. Impossible to miss under the chandelier light. Impossible to attribute to anything accidental given that 30 people had watched Madame Yonsuk Shin created 3 hours ago. The guests near the base of the staircase went quiet in sequence, like a wave moving outward, and in the spreading quiet, Bianca smiled her best contractually correct smile and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. Chairwoman Bake, the most powerful woman in the room and the one whose opinion Yonsuk valued above all others, watched Bianca cross the floor with an expression that was difficult to read. She was 70 years old, built like someone who had weathered several decades of Korean business politics and found them mildly irritating. And she had been present in the receiving hall that afternoon when the serving tray had made contact. Jae-won appeared at Bianca's side within 60 seconds of her entering the room. He moved with the controlled urgency of a man doing damage assessment. "You are making a statement," he said quietly, close to her ear. "I am attending a family gala," Bianca replied serenely, sipping her champagne. "As contracted." "Bianca." His voice was low and precise. "I need you to understand what is at stake tonight. My grandfather is in this room." She turned her head slowly and found him immediately, because Elder Yonsuk Shin was the kind of man who created his own gravitational field. He was seated at the head of the central table, 83 years old, and constructed entirely from angles and authority. His white hair immaculate, his dark eyes moving around the room with the slow, complete attention of someone who had spent 60 years watching perfectly. He had built the Shin conglomerate from a fishing equipment import business in post-war Busan into a multi-industry empire that employed 40,000 people across 11 countries. He had outlasted 3 recessions, 2 government investigations, and 1 attempted assassination. He was the most dangerous person in the room by a distance that made the distance between everyone else irrelevant. He was also, according to Jae-won, the reason for everything. "I see him," Bianca said. "He does not know about this afternoon," Jae-won said. "I needed to stay that way through dinner. Afterward, I will speak to him privately. I will manage the situation. I need you to trust me for 3 hours." Bianca looked at the side of his face. You need me to trust you. Yes, the way you trusted me with the truth 11 months ago. The muscle in his jaw moved. Around them, guests were beginning to notice the conversation. Not the words, but the geometry of it. Two people standing close with the particular taut stillness of a wire under tension. This is not the place, Jae-won said. No, Bianca agreed. The place was a linear in Chicago, over dinner, before I signed my name to a document that made me responsible for a secret you didn't even have the decency to explain to me reapily. She moved away from him before he could respond, crossing toward Chairwoman Bake with her champagne glass and her visible bruise, and the particular composure of a woman who had decided that she was done being a wall. Chairwoman Baked watched her approach with those unreadable eyes. Up close, she was even more formidable, her posture immaculate, her hands folded over a clutch bag that probably cost more than Bianca's first car. Mrs. Shin, the chairwoman said. Chairwoman Bake, Bianca replied. Thank you for remaining this evening. I imagine this afternoon was uncomfortable for everyone. A pause. Are you well? I have been better, Bianca said, honestly. But I have also been. I grew up in Chicago. Something shifted in the chairwoman's eyes. It might have been the beginning of respect. I deal in structural honesty, said. A building that looks beautiful but has a compromised foundation is not a beautiful building. It is a liability. The chairwoman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, Madame Shin has been under considerable pressure this year. I know, Bianca said. I also know that pressure is not a serving tray. Chairwoman Bake looked at her for a long moment and then did something. Bianca did not expect. She laughed. It was brief and genuine and completely out of place in the polished formality of the evening. No, the chairwoman agreed. It is not. Dinner began. Bianca was seated, she noticed, at Jae-won's right hand. His doing, a correction of this morning's seating arrangement, a small gesture of damage control that came 11 months too late, but that she registered nonetheless. Across the table, Madame Yonsuk had appeared, dressed in a midnight blue gown, her composure reconstructed to its usual flawless surface. She did not look at Bianca. She looked past her with the practiced vacancy of a woman pretending a problem does not exist, which Bianca recognized as Yonsuk's highest form of aggression. At the head of the table, Elder Yonsuk Shin ate his meal in thoughtful silence and watched everything. It was during the third course that he spoke to her directly for the first time. My grandson tells me you are an architect, he said. His English was careful and deeply accented and completely authoritative. Yes, sir, Bianca said. What do you build? Cultural spaces, mostly. Community centers, buildings that are meant to be used by everyone. Not just people who can afford them. The elder's eyes moved over her face. He was looking at the bruise. She knew he was looking at it. He had been looking at it since she sat down, with the methodical attention of a man assembling a picture from its component parts. And what brought you to my grandson? He asked. The table went very quiet. Jae-won's hand stilled on his wine glass. Yonsuk's fork paused over her plate. Bianca looked at the elder and understood, with the architectural clarity she applied to load-bearing problems, that this was the question the entire evening had been moving toward. This was the foundation question. The one that, answered honestly, brought the whole structure down. Answered dishonestly, it merely delayed the collapse. She looked at Jae-won. He was looking back at her with the full force of everything he could not say in a room full of people, every plea he could not articulate, every consequence he could not protect her from if she chose this moment to speak the truth. She saw past the second. She saw past the tuxedo and the control and the 11 months of managed distance. And she saw a man who was exhausted by his own secret, who had been carrying it the way a building carries a floor, quietly and at great cost, until the day it couldn't anymore. She thought about Hyan's face, the way he had stood up, the way he had looked at her, not with hostility, but with the careful hope of someone who has been waiting a very long time for the room to stop, pretending. She thought about a serving tray. 30 people who had watched and not moved. Love is complicated, Bianca said to the elder, and she watched every person at that table exhale. It was not a lie. It was an architect's answer, precise, load-bearing, and deliberately incomplete. The elder held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he nodded once, slowly, the way men nod when they have received an answer. That is not the one they asked for, but that tells them, nonetheless, exactly what they needed to know. Dinner continued, but Elder Yonsuk Shin did not stop watching. And Madame Yonsuk, who had been monitoring the exchange between her father-in-law and her daughter-in-law from behind the shield of her dinner plate, set her fork down with a soft click and reached for her wine glass with a hand that was not entirely steady, because Yonsuk was a woman who had spent 61 years reading rooms. And the room right now was reading very badly for her. After dinner, when the tables cleared for dancing and the string quartet shifted into something warmer, Yonsuk materialized at Bianca's elbow with the stealth of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this gap in the crowd. Her hand closed around Bianca's wrist, not painfully, but with the firm, proprietary grip of someone reminding you who holds the deed. "You will not say another word to my father-in-law tonight," Yonsuk said, her voice barely above a breath, her smile absolutely perfect for anyone watching from more than 3 feet away. Bianca looked down at the hand on her wrist. She looked up at Yonsuk's face, and she said very quietly, "You already used up your one warning this afternoon, Madame Shin. You don't have another one." The hand released her wrist. Bianca walked away. Behind her, for the first time in 11 months, Madame Yonsuk Shin stood alone in a room full of people and looked, unmistakably, afraid. She just drew a line in the most dangerous room in Korea, and the elder saw everything. What happens next will break the entire Shin family open from the inside. Subscribe and keep watching, beautiful people. The night broke at 11:47. Bianca knew the exact time because she was standing near the tall windows overlooking the terrace when it happened, watching the lights of Hyundai reflect on the black water below. Her champagne glass empty, her patience emptier. The gala had wound into its later hours, the older guests departing, the music slowing, conversations loosening with alcohol, and the particular recklessness that descends on powerful people when they believe they are among equals. She had managed 3 hours. 3 hours of smiling and deflecting and performing the role she had been paid to perform, moving through the room with Jae-won at careful intervals, answering questions about Chicago and architecture and how she and Jae-won had met with the smooth, practiced ease of a woman who had rehearsed the cover story until it sat in her mouth like a native language. She had shaken hands with men whose names she recognized from financial news and smiled at women who looked at her bruise with expressions ranging from pity to fascination. She had done everything the contract asked of her. Then Madame Yonsuk, who had apparently decided that one catastrophic error per day was insufficient, crossed the room to where Elder Mansuk was seated with Chairman Do-yoon, Jae-won's father, a quiet, broad-shouldered man who had spent the evening watching his wife with a resigned expression of someone who has long since accepted that the weather does what it wants, and said something to them that made both men look immediately and directly at Bianca. Jae-won appeared at her side in seconds. "We need to leave the room," he said. "What did she say to them, Bianca? What did she say, Jae-won?" His voice dropped to almost nothing. "She told that you have been behaving erratically, that the incident this afternoon was provoked, that you made inappropriate accusations about the family during dinner." The champagne glass in her hand was very still. "She is trying to discredit you before you can speak," Jae-won continued, his jaw tight. "My grandfather is already asking my father questions. If we leave now, I can get ahead of it. I can speak to him tonight privately. And tell him what?" Bianca asked. The question landed between them with the weight of everything they had never said. Jae-won had no answer. She could see it, the precise moment the machinery behind his eyes reached the wall it had always reached, the place where the path forward required dismantling everything. And he could not make himself take the step. "That's what I thought," Bianca said. She set her champagne glass down on the windowsill. She turned and walked toward the center of the room. "Bianca," his voice was low and urgent behind her. She kept walking. The room was still populated enough, 60 or 70 guests remaining, enough witnesses, enough weight. Elder Mansuk looked up as she approached his table, and Chairman Do-yoon straightened slightly. And Yonsuk, seated beside her father-in-law, with the expression of a woman who has just neatly executed a plan, saw Bianca coming and went very still. "Elder Shin," Bianca said, stopping before the table, her voice carrying clearly in the space around them. "I believe there are some things you deserve to hear directly from me." Yonsuk rose from her chair. "This is not the time or the place for." "Sit down, Yonsuk," the elder said. It was the first time all evening Bianca had heard him use his daughter-in-law's name without her title. The effect was immediate. Yonsuk sat. Chairman Do-yoon looked between his wife and his father with the expression of a man watching two weather systems converge and calculating the blast radius. Jae-won reached Bianca's side. His hand touched her elbow. "Don't," he said quietly enough that only she could hear, and the single word carried everything. The plea, the warning, the exhaustion of a man who had been running from this moment for years. Bianca looked at his hand on her elbow. She thought about the study door opening, about Hyun's standing up, about the unguarded laugh she had heard through the wall on a sleepless night in month 4, the most human sound she had ever heard. From a man who had paid $35 million to keep the world from knowing he was human. She thought about the serving tray. She thought about 30 people who had not moved. And she thought about Danielle, who had said, "If you are going to do this, do it completely." "Your daughter-in-law struck me across the face this afternoon," Bianca said to the elder, clearly and without drama, as if she were presenting a structural assessment. "In front of 30 guests, with a serving tray, because I asked why my seat at your family's had been replaced with another woman's name card." She paused. "That is what happened. Whatever version you have been told in the last 3 hours is a revision. The elder's dark eyes were absolute. I see the evidence on your face, he said quietly. Yonsuk's voice was ice. She is a manipulative, unstable woman who has been attempting to destabilize this family since the moment Jae-won made the catastrophic error of bringing her here. She signed a contract. She is an employee, not a wife, and he has violated the terms of that arrangement repeatedly by. What contract? Chairman Do-hyun said. The table went quiet. Do-hyun looked at his wife. What contract are you referring to, Yonsuk? Yonsuk realized, in the specific way that people realize, they have just detonated a device they intended for someone else, that she had said too much. She opened her mouth. She closed it. Dad, Jae-won said. What contract? Do-hyun repeated, and his voice had the low, careful quality of a man who already knows the shape of the answer and is giving everyone present one final opportunity to tell the truth before he finds it himself. Silence expanded. Bianca felt at the exact moment the room reached the point of no return. She had felt it in buildings before, the precise skint when a compromised structure passes from distressed to failing, when the question stops being whether it will come down and becomes only when and how. He was looking at his grandfather. For the first time since she had known him, Shin Jae-won looked young. Not the cultivated, dangerous elegance he wore like a second tuxedo, but genuinely, vulnerably young. The way people look when the thing they have been most afraid of their entire lives finally walks through the door and turns out to be exactly as large as they always knew it was. And Bianca, who had signed a contract and kept every clause of it for 11 months, who had swallowed every humiliation and performed every scene and protected a secret that had never fully been explained to her, felt something shift in her chest that was not anger and not pity, but something closer to recognition. She knew what it was to build your whole life around hiding the truest thing about yourself. She had watched her mother do it. She had spent her early 20s doing it herself. Before Bronzeville and Danielle, and the particular freedom of deciding that the truth was cheaper than the performance. She looked at Jae-won for a long moment. Then she looked at the elder. Your grandson, Bianca said, and her voice was quiet and steady and entirely without cruelty. Married me because he needed someone to stand between his private life and this room. He paid me to be his wife in every public sense while he lived his actual life in private. He did it because he believed, with reason, that the truth about who he is would cost him everything he has built. She paused. He was not wrong to be afraid, but he was wrong to let his mother put her hands on the person he asked to carry that fear for him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Bianca had ever stood inside. Elder Yonsuk Shin did not move. His face was entirely unreadable. Chairman Do-hyun had gone the color of old paper. Yonsuk was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, her knuckles bone white, her carefully constructed evening disintegrating around her in real time. And Jae-won, standing beside Bianca, exhaled. It was barely audible, but she heard it. The long, structural exhale of a load-bearing wall finally being relieved of a weight it was never designed to carry alone. Jae-won, the elder said. Grandfather. Jae-won's voice was entirely steady. Yes, it is true. 3 words. 11 months. $35 million. And a serving tray that had finally cost more than it was worth. The string quartet, oblivious and professional, continued playing in the corner. And Madame Yonsuk Shin looked across the table at the daughter-in-law. She had spent 11 months trying to destroy, and understood, with the full, devastating clarity of a woman who had just lost the only game she knew how to play, that she had done this herself. The truth is out. The elder knows. The father knows. And Jae-won just said yes, out loud for the first time in his life. But the fallout hasn't even started yet. What they offer Bianca next, and what she asks for in return, nobody in that room is prepared for. Subscribe and stay with us. It's getting deeper. The room emptied by degrees. Jason spoke quietly to his security detail, and within 10 minutes, the remaining gala guests, acting gracefully, professionally redirected toward the exit, with the kind of seamless efficiencies that only came from a staff that had long practice, making things disappear without visible effort. Packed their instruments, the servers cleared the remaining glasses, and the grand ballroom of the Shin estate contracted down to 5 people. The elder, Chairman Do-yoon, Madame Yonsuk, Jae-won and Bianca seated at the central table under the amber light of the chandeliers, like the last act of a play that had been running for 30 years. Nobody spoke for a long time. Elder Mansuk sat with his hands folded on the table, looking at nothing in particular, which Bianca had already learned meant he was looking at everything. Chairman Do-yoon sat beside him with his elbows on the table and his face's hands, a posture so unlike his usual contained formality that it aged him 10 years in both directions simultaneously. Yonsuk sat rigidly upright, her eyes fixed on a point above Jae-won's head, her express the architectural equivalent of a building that has lost its internal supports, but has not yet registered the instruction to fall. Jae-won sat beside Bianca. Not close, but beside her, and the distinction felt intentional. The elder spoke first. "How long?" he said to Jae-won, not as a question, but as the beginning of an accounting. "Since I was 19, Jae-won said. Do-yoon made a sound that was not quite a word. "And the marriage," the elder continued. 11 months. "The contract, yes." The elder's eyes moved to Bianca. "You were paid?" "Yes," Bianca said. She saw no value in anything other than directness with this man. He was not someone you managed. He was someone you either told the truth to or failed to deceive. And those were the only 2 options. "How much?" $35 million. 15 at signing, 20 at the 2-year mark. Do-yoon lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were red at the edges. He looked at his son with an expression that contained, in roughly equal measure, grief, and something that might, under different circumstances, have been described as relief. "Why didn't you come to me?" "Because you would have told grandfather," Jae-won said, without accusation, simply as a structural fact. Do-yoon did not deny it. He looked at his father. The elder looked back at his son with the particular expression of a man examining his own reflection in an unexpected surface. "You would have." It was not a question either. "I would have acted according to what I believed was right for this family," the elder said carefully. "Which is the same thing," Jae-won said. Another silence. Yonsuk's voice entered the room like a blade. "This changes nothing," she said. "The shares, the inheritance structure, the succession requirements, all of it was built on the premise of a legitimate family line, a legitimate heir. Everything Jae-won holds in this company is conditional on." Yonsuk. Do-yoon's voice was sharp in a way Bianca had not heard from him all evening. "I am stating facts, Do-yoon. I am the only person at this table willing to state facts. Your father built this company across 60 years to pass to his bloodline. The succession documents are explicit. If Jae-won cannot produce an heir within the terms of the family charter, he is my grandson, the elder said. The words were quiet. They were also absolute. The kind of absolute that comes not from volume, but from the particular density of a man who has decided something in a place so deep that no subsequent argument can reach it. Yonsuk stared at him. He is my grandson, the elder repeated, and this time the repetition had the quality of a door being permanently closed. The rest we will discuss, not tonight, not in this room, but the question of whether he belongs to this family is not a discussion I will have. Bianca watched Jae-won receive those words. She watched him the way she watched buildings receive load, looking for the places where the structure moved, where the material showed its honest response to force. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. His hands, which had been very still on the table, relaxed. It was a small thing. It was an enormous thing. Yonsuk turned to Bianca. The desperation had burned through the last layer of her composure. And what was left underneath was rawer and uglier, and in some ways more honest than anything Bianca had seen from her before. You, she said, you did this. You came into this family and you waited, and you calculated, and you chose the most damaging possible moment to. Your mother struck me this afternoon, Bianca said to Jae-won, not to Yonsuk, deliberately redirecting the conversation's address. In front of 30 witnesses, she called me trash. She called me dirt. She told me to get out of this house. She paused. I did not choose the moment, Madame Shin. You chose it for me. You chose it the moment you decided that the rules that govern how human beings treat each other did not apply to you when the person in front of you had no visible power. You were wrong about that, Bianca said simply. Chairman Do-yoon stood up. He walked around the table and stopped in front of his son. Jae-won looked up at him, and for a moment they were simply a father and a son in a room. All the architecture of dynasty and obligation temporarily dissolved. On Jae-won's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just stood there with his hand on his son's shoulder. And Jae-won closed his eyes for 3 seconds, and the gesture contained more honest communications than 11 months of contractual performance had managed to produce. Then Do-hyun straightened and looked at Bianca. Mrs. Lorenzo, he said, using her birth name for the first time, my family has treated you with profound disrespect. Beginning with my son, who should have been honest with you. Continuing with my wife, whose behavior tonight was indefensible. He paused. I am sorry. Looked at him. His apology was genuine. She could see the difference. Having spent 11 months cataloging the precise texture of Yonsuk's performances between a managed social gesture and an actual reckoning. Thank you, she said. The elder rose from his chair. The room reorganized itself around him the way rooms did, everyone straightening slightly, attention converging. He was not tall, but he was immense, in the way that certain old buildings are immense, not through scale, but through the accumulated weight of everything they have survived. He looked at Bianca for a long moment. You protected my grandson, he said, for 11 months. Without the full truth, without genuine partnership, against considerable personal cost. He paused. Is not nothing. No, Bianca agreed. It is not. What do you want? He asked directly, the same way he had asked what she built, with the straightforward curiosity of a man who had long since stopped wasting time on preamble. The question opened the room up. Jae-won looked at her. Do-hyun looked at her. Even Yonsuk, diminished and rigid in her chair, looked at her, because this was the question everyone in the room understood to be the actual center of gravity. What does she want? What does she take? How does the woman who just dismantled everything walk away from the wreckage? Bianca had thought about this. Not tonight, not in the last 3 hours. She had thought about it for 11 months in the margins of a performance, in the quiet of the Chicago penthouse, in the first-class silence of transatlantic flights, in the corridor of this house, on sleepless nights. She knew what she wanted. She also knew it was the one thing nobody in this room was expecting her to ask for, because it was the one thing money, in all its forms, could not simply produce. She looked at Jae-won first, then the elder. Then she folded her hands on the table in front of her and she told them. The room went very quiet. Then Yonsuk said, with a broken disbelieving laugh, "That's what you want. After all of this, that is what you are asking for." "Yes," Bianca said. "You could ask for anything." "I know." "You could ask for." "I know what I could ask for," Bianca said. "I am asking for this." The elder looked at her for a very long time. Then the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, the expression of a man who has spent 83 years watching people reveal themselves under pressure, and has just seen something that genuinely surprised him. "All right," Elder Shin said. She asked for something nobody expected, and the most powerful man in the room just said yes. What Bianca asked for, and what it costs the Shin family to deliver it, is the twist this entire story has been building toward. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe right now and stay with us for the finish. What Bianca asked for was this. She asked for the Hayes Foundation shelter, her Chicago-based transitional housing initiative for women's surviving financial and domestic abuse, to be funded at full operational capacity for 10 years by the Shin Family Charitable Trust. She asked for a purpose-built facility designed entirely by her firm, constructed on a parcel of land in the Bronzeville neighborhood where she had grown up, large enough to house 40 women and their children simultaneously, with a vocational training center, a legal aid clinic, and a childcare facility built into the architectural program. She asked for no Shin family branding on the building, no naming rights, no press releases connecting the donation to the family. She asked for the money to arrive quietly, completely, and without condition, the way all genuinely good things should arrive. She asked for her contract to be dissolved immediately, with the full $35 million released regardless of the 2-year clause, plus a settlement for the physical assault, the figure to be determined by her lawyer and Jae-won's lawyer in a room without either of them present, because she was tired of being in rooms where her value was negotiated over her head. And finally, she asked for one more thing. She asked for Jae-won to tell Hyun the truth about what had happened tonight. Not for her sake, not for the family's sake, but because Hyun had spent years being a secret, and secrets, Bianca said quietly, cost the person being hidden far more than the person doing the hiding ever fully accounts for. That was the part that silenced the room completely. It was the part that made Chairman Do-hyun look at his son with an expression that had finally, entirely, crossed from complicated to simple. It was the part that made Ji-won close his eyes. And it was the part that made Yonsuk Shin, who had spent the last 30 years curating her son's life like an exhibit she was the sole curator of, understand that the woman she had struck with a serving tray was not, had never been, what she assumed. Bianca Lorenzo had not come to take anything from this family. She had come, inadvertently and at considerable personal cost, to give it back something it had lost so long ago that it had forgotten the shape of what was missing. The elder said yes to all of it. He said it with the same quiet, total authority with which he said everything. And the moment he said it, the architecture of the evening shifted permanently. What had been a catastrophe became a reckoning. What had been a reckoning became, in some unnameable way that none of them had language for, yet something closer to a beginning. Yonsuk did not say yes. Yonsuk sat a chair, with her hands in her lap and her face stripped of every performance, and said nothing at all, which was, Bianca thought, the most honest thing she had ever communicated. Later, when the estate was quiet, and the chandeliers had been dimmed, and the ballroom had been cleared to its bones, Jae-won found Bianca on the terrace overlooking the Korea Strait. She was still in the ivory gown, her heels off, her bare feet on the cold stone. The bruise on her face, fully darkened now to the deep purple of a late evening sky. He stood beside her without speaking for a moment, looking out at the water. I should have told you, he said. Yes, Bianca said. I was afraid you wouldn't sign. I probably still would have, she said. $35 million is $35 million. But I would have signed knowing what I was actually protecting. That matters. She paused. It matters to Hyun. It mattered every time your mother looked at me like something that needed to be removed, and I couldn't defend myself honestly because I didn't have the honest picture. Jae-won was quiet for a long time. The water below them moved in the dark, constant and indifferent and beautiful. What you asked for, he said. The shelter, the facility. Yes. You already had the plans drawn? It wasn't a question. He had seen enough of how she worked to know that Bianca Lorenzo did not make requests she hadn't already designed. Phase 1 is complete, she said. I've been working on it for 4 months. I needed the funding. I was going to approach donors when the contract ended. Your family moved the timeline. He almost smiled. It was this nice expression and expression she had seen from him since the study door, and it sat differently on his face than she expected. Softer, less like a controlled performance and more like the actual thing. My grandfather wants to meet with your firm, Jae-won said, not for the shelter project. He has 3 cultural development sites in Busan that have been stalled for 2 years. He said, and I am quoting him precisely, that he wants an architect who deals in structural honesty. Bianca looked at him. He said that. He remembered your exact words to Chairwoman Beck. The lights of Hyundai shimmered on the surface, broken and reassembled continuously by the movement below. I'll have my firm send him a portfolio, she said. He would like you to present it personally, in Busan, at your convenience. My convenience, Bianca repeated, with a particular emphasis on the novelty of the phrase in the context of her relationship with the Shin family. Things are going to be different. It was not a promise exactly. It was the kind of statement a person makes when they are standing at the precise edge of a change they have chosen and are telling it to the air as a way of making it real. Because I won't be here for them. The contract is dissolved. I'm going home to Chicago. And I'm going to build something that matters. She turned to look at him fully. You should call Hyun tonight. Jae-won looked at her. Not tomorrow, she said. Tonight. While you still have the momentum of honesty. Honesty has momentum the same way buildings have momentum when they're going up. Stop in the middle, and everything gets harder to complete. He held her gaze. You are a strange and extraordinary person, Bianca Lorenzo. I'm a girl from Bronzeville, she said. We don't have the option of being ordinary. She picked up her heels from the stone and walked back toward the terrace doors. She paused with her hands on the glass. For what it's worth, she said, without turning around. You are going to be fine. Both of you. The world is not what your grandfather built it in. It has more room in it than he knew when he was writing those succession documents. More room than your mother ever allowed herself to see. She paused. You just have to stop paying people to stand in the gap and stand in it. Yourself. She went inside. The morning came cold and clear, the Korea straight flat and silver under a pale sun. Bianca's bags were packed and waiting at the entrance by 7. The armored car was arranged. Her lawyer in Chicago had received the dissolution terms at 6 and had replied with 2 words. Good riddance. Danielle had called at 6:30. Bianca, she had said, with the particular reverence reserved for moments of genuine awe. You absolute legend. At 7:15, as Bianca was pulling on her coat in the entrance hall, elder Yonsuk Shin appeared. He was dressed simply, a dark suit without the formal weight of the previous night, and he walked toward her without his usual retinue, just the old man and the cold morning light. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a card, plain white, with a Busan address handwritten on it in precise, careful characters. My private office, he said, not the corporate address. When you are ready to present your firm's portfolio, come there. Bianca took the card. Thank you, Elder Shin. He looked at her face, at the bruise that had reached its full dark flowering overnight. His expression contained something that in a less formidable man she might have called remorse. My family has not always been worthy of the people who have stood beside it, he said. No, Bianca said honestly, but you have the chance to be different. That's more than most people get. He nodded once. Then Madame Yonsuk appeared at the top of the staircase. She was immaculate as always, dressed and composed, every hair in place, the performance fully reconstructed. She descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, and stopped on the bottom step so that she remained slightly elevated. A habit so ingrained it was probably unconscious. She looked at Bianca. Bianca looked back at her. The elder watched them both. I have been advised by my husband and my father-in-law, Yonsuk said, her voice perfectly modulated, to offer you a formal apology. I know, Bianca said. I can hear the advised by in that sentence. Something crossed Yonsuk's face. It was complicated and fast, and contained in its depths the very beginning of something that might, in time, become genuine. You are infuriating, she said, and it came out with the bewildered quality of an involuntary truth. I grew up in Bronzeville, Bianca said again. It prepares you for a lot. Yonsuk was quiet for a moment. Then, with visible effort, she said, I was cruel to you, beyond what any circumstance excuses. She stopped. The next words cost her something real. I'm sorry. The entrance hall was very quiet. Bianca considered the apology. She considered the serving tray and the 30 people who had not moved, and 11 months of loaded silence and deliberate diminishment. She considered the bruise on her face and the contract in her history and the foundation plans on her laptop and the 40 women who would one day sleep safely in a building she was going to build in the neighborhood where she had learned that survival and dignity were not mutually exclusive. I accept your apology, Madame Shin, she said. I don't offer you my friendship, but I accept your apology. Yonsuk nodded. Once, small, real, the armored car crunched onto the gravel outside. Bianca picked up her bag. She walked in with nothing but a contract and walked out with everything that actually matters. But the story isn't over yet. What gets built from the rubble of the Shin family and what Bianca Lorenzo builds in Bronzeville is the ending that will stay with you. Kindly subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. 6 months later, Bronzeville had a new building. It rose from the corner of South King Drive and 43rd Street with the quiet, intentional confidence of something that had been designed not to impress but to endure. 4 stories of warm brick and wide glass, its facades, a deliberate conversation between the historic Chicago gray stones that lined the surrounding blocks and the clean, forward-facing geometry of a structure that believed in the future of the neighborhood it stood in. There was no corporate signage above the entrance, no donor wall in the lobby. Just a name, etched simply in steel letters above the wide, deliberately welcoming front doors. The Lorenzo Center. Bianca had named it for her mother. The ribbon cutting happened on a Thursday morning in early April, when the Chicago wind had finally softened from its winter brutalities into something that merely suggested cold rather than insisting on it. The street outside was full, genuinely full, not with curated guest lists of galas and corporate events, but with the particular organic density of a neighborhood showing up for itself. Former residents, current residents, women who had passed through the transitional housing program in the 4 months since soft opening, their children running the lengths of the sidewalk in the pale spring sunlight. Danielle stood beside Bianca at the entrance, wearing a coat that was entirely inadequate for the weather, and refusing to acknowledge it. Your mother would have had something to say about all of this, Danielle said. She would have said it was about time, Bianca replied. She would have said that, and then she would have cried, and then she would have denied crying. Yes, Bianca said. Exactly that. The Lorenzo Center's first cohort had 38 women. 14 of them were in the vocational training program, learning architectural drafting and construction project management through a partnership Bianca had built with her own firm, and 3 allied Chicago contractors, all women-owned, all from the South Side. The legal aid clinic had processed 42 cases in its first 4 months, the majority financial abuse cases. Women who had been systematically isolated from their own economic lives by partners and family members who understood the way Yonsuk Shin had instinctively understood that the fastest way to make a person powerless was to make them invisible. The childcare facility on the 3rd floor had a waiting list. Bianca stood at the entrance and watched it all, and felt the particular quality of satisfaction that she had learned over 31 years to distinguish from happiness. Happiness was weather. Satisfaction was structure. Happiness came and went with the conditions. Satisfaction was load-bearing. You built it once, and it held. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She already knew who it was before she looked. The Busan number had become familiar over the last 6 months in a way she had not anticipated and had examined carefully before allowing. The text from Jae-won read, "The Elders Busan Cultural Center project just broke ground. The construction team said the foundation design is the most innovative they have seen in 30 years. I thought you should know." Bianca smiled at her phone. She typed back, "Tell them they haven't seen anything yet." She put the phone away. The Shin family had kept every term of the dissolved contract and exceeded several of them. The charitable trust funding had arrived in full, on schedule, without condition and without branding, exactly as she had asked. Her firm's presentation to Elder Mansuk had resulted in 3 commissioned projects across Busan, cultural development sites that had been stalled for years under architects who were more interested in monument building than in the humans who would actually inhabit the spaces. The elder had sat across from Bianca in his private office on a rainy Tuesday morning, listened to her present for 40 minutes, and at the end said simply, "Build them the way you built your shelter, like they are for people." She had shaken his hand and gone home to Chicago and started drawing. Jae-won, she spoke to occasionally, in the measured, honest way of 2 people who had been through something significant together and had emerged from it without enmity, but also without illusion. He had called Yun the night of the gala. He had told her so in a message 3 days later. Brief and factual in the way all his communications were, and she had replied with equal brevity and felt, without sentimentality, genuinely glad. Chairman Do-yoon had sent a letter. An actual letter, handwritten on heavy stock paper in careful English that had clearly cost him considerable effort, apologizing for his silence over 11 months and for what he described as his failure of courage in the face of his wife's behavior. It was 4 paragraphs long, and it contained no requests and no conditions. Bianca had read it twice, put it in a drawer in her office, and kept it. Yonsuk she had not heard from directly. What she had heard, through the particular osmotic communication channel that connected the worlds of international high society and Korean business media, was that Madame Yonsuk Shin had, in the months following the Busan Gala, undergone something that the people who observed her described variously as a breakdown, a transformation, and in one memorable phrasing from Chairwoman Beck, who had apparently become unexpectedly candid in her old age, a long overdue confrontation with herself. Yonsuk had resigned from 3 of the social boards she had chaired. She had sold her membership in the Hyundai Country Club. She had, according to Do-yoon's assistant, who communicated these things to Jae-won's assistant, who communicated them to Bianca's lawyer, with the elaborate indirection of people who wanted something known without being credited with knowing it, begun attending a weekly meeting of some kind, the nature of which remained unspecified, but which involved, apparently, a great deal of sitting in a circle with people who were nothing like her and listening more than she spoke. Bianca thought about that sometimes, about Yonsuk's in a circle, listening. She hoped it was real, not for her own sake. The apology in the entrance hall of the Busan estate had closed that particular account. She hoped it for Jae-won, who deserved a mother who was capable of seeing him, and for Do-yoon, who had spent decades being married to a woman whose love had been indistinguishable from control, and for the 30 people who had sat in that conservatory and not moved, who were all of them, in their own way, still sitting in that circle. The ribbon-cutting ceremony began. Bianca stepped up to the microphone that had been set up on the front steps, looking out at the crowd on South King Drive, and for a moment she just stood there, taking it in. The faces, the children, the cold April light on the warm brick of the building behind her, the steel letters of her mother's name above the door. She thought about Alenia. The document slid across it with the casual certainty of a man who had never considered that the person he was buying might turn out to be the most expensive decision he ever made. Not because of what she cost, because of what she built with it. She leaned into the microphone. "I grew up 4 blocks from here," she said, and the crowd quieted. In a neighborhood that people from other neighborhoods drove through quickly and described as struggling, as if struggling were a permanent condition rather than a temporary one, as if the people who lived here were defined by what they lacked rather than by what they built out of what they had. She paused. "My mother raised me in this neighborhood. She worked 2 jobs, and she read to me every night, and she told me, consistently and without exception, that the only thing nobody could take from me was what I knew and who I was." A woman near the front of the crowd nodded. Her daughter stood beside her, holding her hand. "This building," Bianca continued, "is for every woman who has been told she is worth less than she is, who has been told she is a decoration, or a nuisance, or a problem to be managed, who has had the terms of her own life written for her by people who assumed she had no power." The pause. "You have power. You have always had power. Sometimes you just need a foundation under your feet and a room with your name on it before you can feel it clearly." Applause started somewhere in the middle of the crowd and spread. Danielle was crying and absolutely denying it. Bianca stepped back from a microphone and cut the ribbon, and the doors of the Lorenzo Center opened, and the people of Bronzeville walked inside. Later, when the ceremony was done and the crowd had thinned and the afternoon light was going golden over the south side rooftops, Bianca stood alone in the center of the building's main hall, looking up at the ceiling she had designed, with a row of clerestory windows that caught the late sun and distributed it in long, warm bands across the floor. It was the detail she was proudest of, the way the light fell, the way it made the room feel like it was being held. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. "A Busan area code," she answered. "Mrs. Lorenzo." The voice was old and careful and carried the immense, unhurried authority of a man who had built 60 years of an empire and was now, perhaps for the first time, building something he could not quantify. "Elder Shin," Bianca said. "I saw the photographs of the building," he said. "My assistant showed me the Chicago news coverage." A pause. "The clerestory windows." "Yes, they were not in the original plans you presented to me." "No," Bianca said. "I added them when I understood what the building needed." "And what did it need?" "Light that arrives without being asked for," Bianca said. "The best things usually do." A long silence, not uncomfortable. The silence of someone turning a thing over slowly, examining it from all angles, finding it sound. "My 3 Busan projects," the elder said. "I want those windows." Bianca smiled. "They'll have them." She hung up and stood in the light of her mother's building in the neighborhood that had built her, and she felt the load-bearing satisfactions of a foundation that had been designed correctly, constructed, and built to last. The Shin family recovered, not the way dynasties recover by sealing the cracks and reapplying the veneer, but the way structures recover when a good engineer finally gets honest about the damage and repairs from the bone outward. Slowly, visibly, with the permanent record of the repair written into the material itself. The Lorenzo Center thrived. and Bianca Lorenzo, who had signed a contract on a white tablecloth in a restaurant on the north side of Chicago. For reasons that were entirely practical and had ended up somewhere she could never have designed from the outside, understood something she would later tell the women in her vocational program when they asked her how you know when a building is finished. You know, she told them, when it starts doing what it was built for, not what it was supposed to look like from the street. She looked up at the light coming through her windows. It was doing exactly that. Dearest viewers, Bianca Lorenzo walked into a contract and walked out with a legacy. She was called trash. She was called dirt. She was struck in front of 30 people who did not move. And she turned every single one of those moments into a foundation. If this story moved you, if you felt every single turn of it, subscribe to the Afro-Korean Story Desk now. See you in the next story.